Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Excellent. Welcome to the Executive Insight Roundtable on the future of small telcos. It's not every day that small telcos get to stand up and do big things, but when we do it in a big way. So I'd like, first of all, to welcome you and thank you for all coming along this afternoon. And I'd like to thank all of the four people here up front with me. It makes me a lot less nervous having some real great experts with a long years of experience and great companies that they run participating in this. So if I might start on my left, I'll get Robert to introduce himself and then we'll move across. So to give you an idea of who we all are and so that you've got a bit of a background onto to some of the ways in which you could view a small telco for a start. Now, I'm Paul McCann. I'm on the PTC board, and I'm also the secretary of PTC, and I have my own consulting organisation in Australia. My background and experience is all around international telecommunications, with 40 years old experience in originally Telstra and then Reach, and the last 8.5 years has been with Verizon in the Asia Pacific region. So I'd like to just pass over to Robert, please.
Thanks, Paul. Bob Maloney. I'm from Pacific Data Systems. It's actually our operating company. PDS is Guam-based, but operates in Guam and in the Northern Marianas, and here in Hawaii, and also in American Samoa. For purposes of this afternoon's exercise, I think we'll focus, I'll speak mostly to our competitive local exchange operation on Guam, which has been up and running for a couple of years now. We also have CLEC authority here in the state of Hawaii, but we're still in the process of negotiating interconnection with Hotel. Always lots of fun. We also do a lot on the systems integration side and also on the international communication side. I do a lot of IP VPN work across the Pacific for enterprise and government customers. We launched CLEC services in Guam in 2006 and have been growing steadily ever since. Focusing initially primarily in the enterprise and government space. It will be moving slowly into residential, targeted residential in the coming 12 to 18 months. So I think we have a unique perspective as a small telco. Our primary competitor is the incumbent in Guam, formerly owned by the government, was privatized in 2005, and has undergone 2 ownership changes which have posed a couple of challenges. But it's also the first time from a regulatory perspective that independent regulators have had to really look and change the way they deal with telecom. Before, it was all about protecting the government-owned monopoly from guys like me. Now it's got to be rebalanced, so that competitors are protected against the vagaries of the ILEC, and so that the playing field can stay at least somewhat level. So I look forward to this afternoon's discussion and sharing with you, and also learning from you, because there's probably a lot of wisdom out there. So, Richard?
Well, thank you, Bob, for the opportunity. Thank you, Paul, for the opportunity, and PTC. My name is Richard Misech. I'm from Palau. Palau National Communications Corporation. For short, you can refer to it as PNCC. Just so that I'm in sync with everyone else, I think I'm the smallest of the small ones here. Like to be called the incumbent small telco. However, I want to add a word to that. It's evolving small telco. Reason for that is we were once government-owned. We still are, but I would like to look at it as the people's company. We don't get subsidies whatsoever from the government. We operate on our own, so we operate like any private enterprise. We have our set of rules to follow, which is through an act since 1982. Services we do is all of the above. We started with landline, of course, and we do wireless GSM. We do digital TV, hybrid core network. Head end is digital, hybrid distribution through fiber, coax. We also do ISPs and data. And what else? Did I forget something? Anyway, so being a small island company, the thoughts that we're challenged with every day is to try and continue to evolve as what the demands are. And we look at it as it's our effort to contribute to the island developing big picture. Everything we do is, we don't just do it because it's business case. We do it because we have a social obligation. We believe that we need to contribute to that effort. And we hope that we share the same visions with our leaders and our policymakers. And with that, we're also learning from our friends in the region, successful stories from Guam and others. We have approximately about 26,000 subscriptions across the board. Population-wise, we're about under 20,000 residents. We attract 100,000+ tourists a year, which will translate to a lot of business from the tourism industry. With that, I'd like to also anticipate that the audience will help me with questions or things that I can, and I look forward to learn from you as well. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Siew. I come from Brunei International Gateway. Brunei is a small country of 400,000 people. There are 2 fixed line operators and 2 mobile operators. It's a land of small telco, but my company name is BIG, big. If you look at the team for PTC'13, the only thing big about us is the capacity. We hope to be big in the other 2 Cs as well. Yeah. So our main business is capacity. We own the Asia America Gateway, or the AAG Gateway cable. As an initial investor, we also own the Southeast Asia Japan cable. So there are 2 major cables that we own, and that's enough to keep us busy. Okay, my background is Telecom Malaysia. I finished my career with Telecom Malaysia, and now I move on to Brunei as a deputy GM. That's about it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andrew Taylor. I'm from Pactel International. Pactel is a 10-year-old company. It was founded in 2003. I'm one of the founders of the business, and our core business is service provision in IP transit, predominantly via satellite to the Pacific territories, and also wholesale voice. We're a small telco/service provider, but also at the same time, a lot of our customers are the small telcos. So we sort of understand the small telcos as well as being one ourselves. We've got business in territories spreading from French Polynesia all the way to Afghanistan, and PTC is a core event for us each year, and I'm happy to share some of the insights on the questions that have been placed by Paul, and for interactive discussion throughout this session.
Thanks, Andrew. Much appreciated. Now, we're going to do something slightly different. We're not going to talk very much. We're going to try and get you lot out there talking, because there's so much knowledge within the room. I feel that it's fairly important that we actually do open up a discussion. Now, Bob, if you had to describe the type of small carrier, what do you reckon it'd be?
The small carrier.
Just a small data carrier.
Yeah.
Got any people in the audience that fit that sort of small telco category then?
Yeah, well, I guess in our context, in the context of Guam, or even here in Hawaii, the easy answer to that is any carrier who's not the incumbent, who's not Hotel here or who's not GTA in Guam.
Got any hands?
Yeah.
Anybody in the same boat as Bob? There's 2. That's good. I'm taking note of this. How would you describe yourself, your company, as a small telco?
It would be, with one word, it would probably be, again,
Small incumbent.
small incumbent, probably.
We got any small incumbents
fitting.
out there? No? No small incumbents. Sorry, mate. There we go. Yep, there's some. They even spoke up.
I'm not too sure if.
What a wonderful event this is turning into.
Yeah.
All right, there's a couple of small incumbents around. Sue.
Yeah, BIG supports small carriers, small telcos.
Supporting small
Yeah,
telcos.
technically, we are not a small telco. Our job is from the cable station to the world.
Okay, so
So
you're a
we support the
wholesaler.
small telco.
So you're a wholesaler to small telcos.
Yeah, we are pure wholesaler. We don't own the customer. We don't own enterprise or retail customers.
All right, you might be unique yet. Is there anybody out there that does that? A similar sort of thing? A wholesaler supporting small carriers? No? Okay. You and I will be friends though, all right?
We will. Pactel is a non-tier one. I'm not going to say which number below tier one because everyone thinks they're a higher tier than they are. We're a non-tier one wholesale IP transit satellite voice supplier.
There we go. You don't have to be that specific, but if you get the idea of what he does. Have we got any other people in the audience like that? Gee, that's all right. That's all right. I'm therefore assuming that either I have missed a category or the rest of you are for the large incumbents. Yeah?
Good morning, afternoon, which time zone? We're from Australia, so I have to ask the question about which time zone we're in. We're from Macquarie Telecom, and I guess we consider ourselves to be more of a mid-sized telco, but we're definitely not Telstra.
Yeah.
Paul, you'll appreciate that, and I think you know some of my colleagues. So.
I do. I do know
So that's
some of
probably
you.
the category where we're interested in views around and discussions today around the non-incumbent and sort of,
Yeah.
we consider ourselves to be a bit of a challenger in our market in Australia. But I don't know that I would call us small.
No, you're not small, but you're absolutely correct. You sit next to Telstra and you're about the right size of small.
Exactly. Thank you.
So, have we got anybody like Macquarie Telecom? Middle-sized second carrier? Yes, Siew.
Might be wrong because some of us, although we might not be doing it now, have helped to run small telcos. So just maybe another category.
Yep, no troubles at all.
Right.
But at any rate, you get to try and define a small telco. I've sat and thought about this ever since they asked me to do this panel, and I'm going. I really think that there's so many views here of how you define a small telco. I got a great cross-section of people here that actually represent a fairly diverse range of what you could define as a small telco. I think the primary thing in my mind is, as Macquarie Telecom quite beautifully put, it's not really an incumbent. It's coming from behind the incumbency, perhaps, or it's in a situation where you are starting out in a competitive environment and you've got the same size. Big, that's very interesting. Tell us about how you defined your two primary customers. There is fixed and mobile, wasn't it?
Yeah, our customers are the big telcos.
They're the big telcos.
And we serve them the big way.
Yeah. And one of them is really good at fixed, and the other one is, that same one's not very good at mobile. Is that right? And then the other one's really good at mobile and has very little fixed.
So they are both our customers. They are the carriers in Brunei are also our shareholders.
Yeah,
So we do have some sort of a monopoly.
that's good.
Paul,
So-
one definition I think for small is underdog.
Is it underdog?
Underdog.
Does anybody agree with that?
Small islands where they are the incumbent, but they're also a small. So some of the challenges that incumbent or non-incumbent face are quite similar. Like, without getting ahead of our headlights, over-the-top technology, applications that are eating their lunch, etc. So there's things in common, I thought, perhaps.
Yeah.
Whatever the
Yep,
definition.
Yep.
No, you're absolutely correct. I loved chatting with Richard earlier today when he actually he goes, well, I am the incumbent, but he's actually there is competition in Palau.
There is.
Do you want to tell us about it?
Yes, there is. We do have a, let me rephrase that. We are the only regulated provider, whereas we have a mandate with a social obligation. The other players are non-regulated. With the absence of a framework, I call them non-regulated because, they can play whatever rules they want to play. When do we have a competition in the wireless space, GSM, as well as in the internet space? And infrastructure-wise, they choose, of course, to deploy using wireless points. So they don't contribute into our efforts, while we are now faced up with a challenge to maintain the infrastructure for everyone, and we have that challenge. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I think I go back to his point, Bob's point. We need to operate on a common playing field for the benefit of not only the companies that participate, but the country. And we look at it, that's a very important thing, and it's critical.
All right. So thanks. Today, what we want to do is work out which way this goes. Look at that, if we can. What issues do the smaller telcos face in growing and ensuring future revenues? And how are these affected by the business strategies of larger players? Now, on the bottom, I've written the name of the experts that are here with us today. And what I would like to do is get John to come out, if he could, and he's going to drive the computer for us. And you're very competent, it's fine. And what we'll do is just to think about, what comes into your mind when you actually hear, what drives... Could you go back to the top slide? Sorry, there was slide, the question again, so that everybody can have a little bit more of a look at it. There we go. So, what issues again, just to read it so it's clear in our mind. What issues do smaller telcos face in growing future revenues? How are these affected by the business strategies of larger carriers? All right, thanks John, we can go down again now. Just to help get, unless somebody else wants to put a question, and I thought, well, let's start off with a bit of a question. And what John's going to do is he's going to jot down a few issues or items that you people are going to bring up during the course of this discussion. So what do you think would make a small telco, if we're fairly clear what a small telco is in that regard, what do you think makes them successful? What would make a small telco a successful small telco?
Well, let me pose another question in the context of these days. Because I would bet that the real small telcos, and certainly Richard would be in that category, by how they're dealing with declining voice minutes. And Richard has a particular problem we can maybe get into, but yeah, so what makes it, what is the strategy to dealing with everybody taking their business to, internet, IP traffic?
We can ask that question if you like.
Could I add to the question, because I think it's a very good one, if I may, that
certainly. Yeah.
Looking at reading recently about from a financial aspect, what are the things that might slow down investment in telecoms? And they weren't talking particularly about small or large, and it's the failure, and I think it could apply to smaller ones, given the problems of over-the-top traffic that is eroding their traditional revenue base, is the failure of telcos to monetize new services. I mean, to really sort of look at and leverage the technology and to turn those into services with a price on them. And we're a bit slow to do that, or that's what the investment community tells us. One of the biggest things that says investment, they see us not monetizing it properly. We're not creative.
Anybody address that?
I suppose I can give our feedback on the big question first. obviously what we face is we're in a competitive environment, but what we want to avoid in our business is the commoditisation of services. And I think voice was mentioned as one which is becoming it's less of a commodity even, it's now an application that sits over the top. So from our perspective, we've got to maintain sort of extra value add away from the commodity business, not just selling 1 million minutes to wherever, or it's about giving the customer extra value and, more importantly, service. And how we compete with the bigger telcos is on reactivity, responsiveness and customisation of our services. Our customers, big telcos tend to have a rate sheet which the salespeople read off, and if it doesn't fit within that list of services, often the big telco falls over. And that's where guys like the smaller players who are more nimble and reactive can customise their solutions. So as a small telco, that's how we sort of dodge around the big guy. Now, big telcos, we find their strategies do evolve, and there's certain areas of business where we just don't try and compete with them, and we can't because they can just crush you with their size. But where the customer requires something a little bit out of the box, and that's becoming more and more the case, once customers get used to flexibility and adaptive solutions, they start to like it. So that's how we sort of try and stay ahead.
So when you look at the success of a small carrier, you'd say flexibility and adaptability.
Yeah, our business is small, so it can adapt quicker to what the customer wants than a big telco, just through inertial factors of a big telco.
Would everybody agree with that? Do you think that that's probably one feature of a small telco? And Hugh, if we haven't answered the rest of the question, I will get to it. That's fine. Thanks, mate.
I totally agree with what Andrew is saying, because that's what makes small telcos successful nowadays, is being able to dynamically identify the customer need and addressing it and meeting it exactly as it is in a dynamic way. So innovation coming into place and customizing the product and services just to the need of the customer. Absolutely. So efficiency, cost efficiency, and cost effectiveness is in there as well.
Excellent. So, if you guys want to, any time, speak.
I think I'm echoing what was already said, but I think customer service should just really be called out, because I think that can be a real differentiator. And sometimes if the big incumbent, there's a lot of bureaucracy, you're just a number in a queue waiting 10 minutes at an offshore call center outside of the home jurisdiction. One of the things we try and do at Macquarie Telecom is to really have that sort of personal accountable service where we're personally accountable. You've got a representative that and really knowing the customer. You're not just number 3,582 on our books. So I think that's a way to kind of, and even if there's a cost delta or other things that you can't do, people will come back for good service.
Thanks. Can I ask that when you actually do speak, could you just say your first name at the beginning so that we can address you correctly in coming back, if that's okay? But I mean, some of the smaller telecoms focus in order to ensure future, that's another new question. Okay, that's fine. Any more comments from anybody about either what makes a small telco successful or what are the challenges a small telco faces? Yeah, Richard.
I have one to share, if I may, Paul. I add to what Sonia was saying, as well as others. It's a common knowledge. Any business, you look at either you create new revenue or reduce your cost. Now, in an island setting, we have to look at the long-term strategy, but you have to eventually move towards that with a managed step-by-step approach. And on the cost-saving side, so that you can catch up on your savings and divert that investment towards your next step. And that's what we do. A lot of people come to Palau and they're surprised we're not selling headsets. We're not selling any CPEs at all. We cut out our warehouse spaces, we cut our inventory, we focus now specifically on connectivity. We don't manage that, and that takes away the customer service enhancement that we need to do on every product. That's cost savings. Warehousing, that's another one. So there's, across the board, there's many ways you can look at in reducing that cost. However, I want to share with the audience, fiber is cheaper than satellite. If I had fiber, I would probably be doing more. And that's the biggest cost and challenge for an island country, international capacity cost. The static, very high cost connectivity to the rest of the world. And please, remember, we import everything in the islands. Everything is imported. And so, that's the perspective of how things are. If we can somewhat achieve that biggest challenge, then perhaps we can move forward with others. But again, Shoni made a good point. If you can recall, I said evolving incumbent small telco. We have to be part of that process all the time. And I want to share too that during the digitization process of our analog TV to digital, we went from like dinosaur to in a week's time. I mean, it's the flexibility you have being small.
Flexibility, thanks.
I think a follow-on on Richard's theme. I think it's safe to say for any small operator, if you're not thinking about your business, you're out of business. And what we heard in the last few minutes here, I think speaks more to the beneficial power of what most small operators have. And their ability to succeed is directly linked, I believe, to the nature and quality of their character. They don't have all the other resources. They don't have the money. They don't have the manpower. They don't have limitless sources of other resources. So what do you rely on? What do you have if you don't have those things? You've got yourself, and what do you bring to the table every day? So it's your imagination. Don't do things simply because, well, that's the way that guy does it. Find a different way to do it. Build that better mousetrap. Constantly innovate. Once you build a better mousetrap, keep rebuilding it. Agility. I made the comment when we were talking earlier as a group before we launched into formal session. God bless the incumbents. Many times they just can't get out of their own way. And that is a situation that can be exploited by a smaller operator who is agile and who can recognize, who's focused and recognizes those opportunities. The last two character traits I think that have to absolutely be in the mix for any small operator are perseverance and tenacity, willing just to stay in the game, regardless of how bloody it gets. Stay in the game. And I know in our own situation, when the government that owned the incumbent sold it, the first company that bought it was laboring under the impression that they bought and were entitled to an ongoing monopoly. And about 6 months later, after Guam law was harmonized with U.S. federal telecommunications law, and it became possible for the first time for a CLEC authority to be granted, they were just shocked and amazed when our CLEC authority was issued by the Guam Public Utilities Commission. How can you do this? And tried every which way to stop it. When they couldn't stop it, they said, okay, you got to negotiate your interconnection agreement. We wound up having to arbitrate every single page of a 1,032-page agreement. It took a year. Lots of blood. We didn't give up. Okay? So keep your eye on the prize, because the incumbent doesn't have all the answers. And they really, many, many times, cannot get out of their own way. And that creates opportunity. So.
I can add to that. Another thing we've learnt in our areas, there's some, as a smaller player, there's some customers in the pyramid where at the top, there's the gold customers, which the big telcos will throw huge resources at trying to win that business. And sometimes the ones in the mid-tier and the customers lower down in that pyramid get neglected by the big guys because they're all after the huge prize or the really big accounts. So we find we spend a bit of time on who we pick as our target customers, because you can spend a lot of effort as a smaller player chasing business you're never going to get. So the quicker you identify that and focus your efforts, on customers that you will win, where your strengths come out, then that means you'll get better results financially. There's some big customers will just go to incumbent for various reasons. One, they can offer the whole bundle where the smaller player can't. And the quicker you learn to just accept that that's the reality and then focus where you're strong, your business is a lot better off.
So there's yeah. You're running very close to being the smallest. That's absolutely correct.
So I think it depends on how you interpret successful. Successful for me is actually reaching every people on the island or in the community to have what we refer to as the basic, fundamental, and I think human rights to get communication. So my successful is measured by my ability to actually reach out to all people in the community. Now, the challenges, of course, is actually trying to find solution that is affordable. So a cost is one of those things. But I don't actually look at cost. I'm actually looking at my community receiving services as sort of being the basic, fundamental entitlement in life to communicate with the outside world. We are so isolated. And for me, profit-driven, those kind of things are not really relevant.
Yeah.
As being a success in my community. My success is measured on how well I actually deliver internet services, telephony, and that to everyone within the community. And that's how I measure my success. Thanks.
Thank you. Does anybody want to say anything in response to that? I mean, the attitude that small carriers or small telcos have, I think, is critical to the success. The flexibility, the adaptability, they're all very relevant parts. Does anybody disagree with that, or does anybody want to add some more in? Because we have different types of small carriers or small telcos to consider. The attitudes towards humanity, commitment to provide a service to the country is one. We've got the ability to identify a niche in perhaps a larger market. So there's perhaps more.
Yeah, my name is Dan Smith.
Dan.
I think Tokelau and maybe Niue would be examples of, you might call them micro telcos, right? And where perhaps, where maybe no competition would really make sense. Although, if I live on a really remote place, I might want to bypass you. Go with Andrew so I think the very small places are in a different category, but in some place like Palau, and I'm pressing a little bit on Palau because my Pacific connections are with Marshall Islands, which had similar kind of funding. So I'm surprised that your government didn't give you a monopoly, because in Marshall Islands the NTA is up until it's what's inevitable now is it fiercely defends its monopoly. I remember I put in some payphones a few years ago where they were considered legal, and after that they amended the law to make them illegal. So I guess maybe you could tell us, did you get do you have a monopoly, and furthermore, I guess you allow a bypass so your competitors can connect outwardly by satellite?
Yes, I wish I had my regulator with me so he can appropriately respond. However, I will try. through the years, there was an instant of time, I guess it was around in the 80s, where it was written such that it was a common concept throughout the islands, in Micronesia especially. Same as what you referenced to, the NTA structure of a regulatory framework. The monopoly word was used there somewhere. However, through the evolution of changes in policy and directions, that word was replaced by a word, common carrier. Now, was it deliberately done, intentionally? And what were the objectives? I cannot answer that. I guess it's a question that is appropriate for my policymakers to answer. But what I know is that perhaps our policy makers at the time were thinking changing this would introduce a concept of competition environment where perhaps they were thinking to build an infrastructure, there's two ways to do it. Either we infuse funding from the government, taxpayers' money, or we have the private sector do it. However, there were a lot of loopholes in the process. There was no comprehensive framework developed, even up to today. There was one item on that piece of policy that states to the effect of regulating licenses on broadcasting. And that's the loophole I'm referring to. Whereas people who thought about when the wireless was readily available and from anybody or vendors to provide infrastructure, that's when it started. So again, to go back to your fundamental question, I have no answer. I'm just speculating on how it was going, but I know that we're totally, the company that I work for, PNCC, is totally supportive of a comprehensive framework. Matter of fact, we have been driving our policymakers to make it happen. We want to open it up. You may be asking me, you crazy. Why? Here's the reasons. Again, going back to what I've said, it's an island country building process. It's an island nation building process. The benefits are just like my brother from Palau. If my citizens and the communities are connected and have the opportunity to get the ICT services, the health, education, and what have not, call their kids in the States affordably, I'm happy. I guess that's the perspective of the difference between big players, big countries, and us in the small islands. And that's what drives us, going to work every day, even though we don't enjoy a lot of things there, we try to make it happen. Thank you so much.
So let me comment on that topic. Yeah. Let me share the experience of some telcos that face declining revenues, voice revenues, and they want to do something. So they are fixed line operators, and they realize they need to get video into their business plan. So they lobby the government, saying that the country needs broadband infrastructure to the home, and that the private sector can't do it alone. So they ask for some kind of government intervention, and they managed to do it. At least more than 2 telcos has managed to do it. They get government some kind of initial funding to put broadband infrastructure to the home, and they doing something, they secure their future as a smaller telco. So I think at that kind of situation, I think Palau should go on that rationale. The private sector can't do it. The nations need it. You need to go into broadband, video, do something. I think the mobile operators also need 4G, LTE. They should use some kind of rationale. Probably the shortcut to get success measured by the gentleman who say the success is measured by ability to serve the community effectively.
Let me just add one more, Paul. I want to make sure it's complete. It's not to basically say that competition is applicable or could be sustained in any level of market, or it's not to say it's good or it's not good. I guess it's how you do it. Whatever you do it right. needs to be done right. That's my point. And that's, yes,
I mean, that's kind of at least in other places, your neighbors, you had a U.S. solution imposed on you without the Universal Service Fund and High Cost Fund that say would be available on, that potentially available on Guam. I don't know whether Guam has high cost or USF funding, but you didn't have that available to you. And therefore, kind of in the face of competition, your competitor wouldn't have that kind of debt. But maybe tourism saves, maybe a high volume of tourism changes the picture for you.
We hope for better pastures. We hope for greener places to graze. And you're right, the infrastructure, domestic infrastructure in Palau, we're still servicing that debt from RUS. However, we didn't get the benefits of the NECA, so Universal Service Fund. So we don't benefit from that. However, we're very appreciative of the efforts that our government and the United States secured funding to support the developing of a very up-to-date or very modern infrastructure for the country. And we're appreciative of that. And again, it's the changes of diversification affects the whole landscape in many ways. So we have to be, most of the time, like everyone else, we have to step away and think about the next step, think outside of the box. Subscribe to programs, being close to the government, at least we can benefit. We don't get subsidies, but we can benefit from their support to gain support from donor organizations to drive ICT programs and projects, take lead. And I think that's the most important thing is to be the catalyst in those developments. Because you're there, you know the experience, you can guide them or partnership, collaboration with the stakeholders, education, health, general community, to make it happen.
So the smaller telcos, obviously, there's significant challenges that they face. But it's been, what I've heard so far, I mean, when you look at the advantages, the attitude that I think all people have basically said is an enthusiasm. It's their heart is in a different place. It's the ability to be nimble. It's the focus on a customer service, be it a niche or be it a country. I think these sorts of things really are areas that will help make a telco in general very, very successful. But I think that's really what we see as making a small telco successful.
Paul, I think one of the other reasons why small telcos will always be around is this business is constantly evolving. Change is our friend, because we can adapt to it fast. If the telco industry didn't change and it stayed the same, we'd be out of business. We'd be crushed by the big guys. So I think, in a competitive environment and less so where Richard is the constant change means new products will come along and we can then go and offer those, be quick to market, support our customers, keep them ahead of the game, faster than the big guys. So that's another key I see is the change in the industry.
Yeah, Robert, you were going to say something? Robert?
No.
You weren't? Okay, fine. So we've gone, sorry, yes.
Sorry, Sione from Tonga. And I'm going to just say, what I was going to say was supported by what Andrew is saying. It's basically speaking from the sense of a small island, and in that small island, there's a small telco like us, isolated by ocean. And then about 10 years back, we were so isolated, so there were no impact of or influence from external forces like economic crisis, technological changes. So we were so isolated. But nowadays, we are influenced heavily and impacted heavily by external forces. Why? Because of technological changes, because of economic crisis. That's why we need to be dynamic and innovative. continuously. Because of the better connectivity now and the development of high broadband, information sharing is now across the globe, it's global. The impact now is more and more, and that's why we need to be dynamic and innovative, because of information sharing is so easy now.
Yep.
Like social networking, you hit one comment and it's known from pole to pole. But that impact didn't matter in the past 10 years because we were so isolated. Nowadays, it impacts a lot, and it matters a lot because what we receive in USA is received in Tonga.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's look to the future. Where the new revenue is going to come from? Where are you going to get your revenue from when you look at some of the challenges that you face?
Smartphone.
Where from?
Well, smartphone. Yeah, smartphone.
Smartphone.
Uses
All
a lot
right.
of data, and there's opportunity for raising the pricing plan, and you get more revenues. Yeah, I think smartphone is a new technology where I think smaller carriers can look at it,
Yeah.
get more revenue. Yeah.
Yeah? Any other ideas, everyone? Yeah. Certainly.
A little bit similar to the US and Canada, where the two providers in Australia, the big players, are Telus and Optus, and then maybe Primus is a tier below, and then everyone else resells their minutes, their bandwidth, and comes up with their own packages. Are you finding, I like what you said about if you're not doing like a all-in-one solution or going after the big customers, you know that's not your space. But in your space that you're in, small to mid-sized businesses, are you finding now that the sales forces of these big companies that you're actually buying wholesale from, that their retail divisions, the salespeople are actually getting better pricing than your wholesale pricing? Because you're doing your own billing and customer service. Like in America and Canada, there's trends where the sales forces of level 3 or Sprint are coming out with better pricing to small and mid-sized businesses than the wholesale prices. So margins are being squeezed, and I got to imagine that that's happening in your country as well, which means that it makes it harder for you to just do your play on customer service, saying, go with us, we're more nimble, we adapt to change quicker. That's sort of your...
Yeah, look, Australia is a deregulated market with over 300 something licensed carriers in that market. If you tried to compete across all suite of products, it's very difficult. Our philosophy, and I think there's another successful company in Australia called Vocus, who's stuck to a couple of small niches. They're in a wholesale IP transit business. They do data centers and a few other small things, and that's all they do. And they do it well, and in those areas they've been able to maintain good EBITDA percentages. They're a listed company, so they're... There are instances where your question about wholesale and retail, we buy wholesale capacity off some carriers for certain things, but we've seen in our business the cost of those wholesale services we've been purchasing come down. So, moving on to where we get the revenue from, in our business, we're still we don't have, our business doesn't have thousands of customers. We're more in the sort of enterprise, corporate, government and telco space. We don't deliver a lot of services, but what we try and do is deliver those number of services better. And like our business for example, wouldn't necessarily get into the retail end of services for smartphones, but we'd provide networks that help deliver those services better to the retail telcos. And there's still a lot of areas in the telco business where their margins are good. And the small players, the smart ones, sit there and look at where the big telcos are making very ridiculous margins. And obviously they present opportunities. I think Richard Branson in all his business ventures has gone after things where the incumbents have been lazy and haven't provided good service at high margin. And I think with the constant change and the nature of big enterprises, there's always going to be opportunities there. Is it easy? Of course not. If it was easy, everyone would do it, but it's definitely possible with the right effort and the right people.
It's open. If anybody wants to comment on any of that, please go ahead. You'll also note sometimes we flick different slides up. Feel free to think about the question, and if you want to input, just input over the top of it. It's fine.
Yeah, sorry for talking too much. Just on the question of revenue, I'm actually seeing the internet as sort of a growth for the area that I'm in Tokelau. Given our isolation, our population is largely abroad, like about 8,000 people in New Zealand, probably 2,000 people in Australia, Hawaii. So communication is very important because we are close family orientated. So people need to communicate. What I'm seeing in Tokelau is that although we are losing in voice revenue, we're actually picking up dramatically in the internet use area. Social network, Skyping, that kind of stuff, which we're picking up. So the concern about voice for Tokelau is not really because we're actually making use of the internet capacity to make sure that people communicate. And I'm seeing, sending images, events and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's really giving us the bucks on the per megabyte cost. So I'm seeing that in the Tokelau as a positive on the internet side of things.
Yeah, thanks. Where else do you think the small telcos are going to get their revenues from? Has anybody got any more ideas? Over the top type services running via the internet tends to sometimes disrupt things, but as Andrew says, we've got to evolve and we've got to change.
Yeah, if I can share, Paul, the disruption of the changes in how our customers react to the changes of how they handle their. The gentleman mentioned the decline, the tolls. Yes, that's true, but we don't look at we certainly don't look at efforts to try and police it. We try to look at how we reverse that. How would we look at that and creatively provide opportunity from that disruption. First of all, in a small environment such as Palau, again, I'm going back to satellites. If you ask me what were the three things you need, fiber connectivity to the world, fiber connectivity to the world, fiber connectivity to the world. We have to manage bandwidth at every level. I have my team in the room, and this is a daily job. We have to be reactive to those demands and changes. Manage your time, bandwidth. That's the only, because the more you save on that, then you can reach out and build upon your strengths. Continue to focus on your strengths. Another factor we try to look at that I guess I'm happy that we don't have our competitors here, and I'm sure they're not going to hear this. Build on your strengths as well as trying to achieve as much as possible, trying to achieve partnership with the private industries, private stores. Like I said, we don't sell handsets. We never package our services with handsets. We used to. We changed that strategy, and it proved to work best for us. We do partnerships, and that drives the volume in some areas, demand, and now you're looking at possible volume changes in terms of more revenue, and the cycle continues.
So I think to expand on that point, it's important for a small telco not to try and do everything.
Yeah.
Because you don't have the resources.
Focus on
and
your strengths.
outsource, partner where possible.
Yeah. No?
Yeah, the way that we refer to our strategic approach to this challenge is looking for opportunities between the elephant's toes. And we find in our situation that there's typically three things that you can where you can find opportunity against the larger competitor to drive your own business forward. Because there are things that the incumbent doesn't do. Second, there are things that they cannot do, whether it's precluded by regulation or some other reason. And thirdly, there's things that they just won't do, because they're too lazy. Or they'll make a half-hearted stab at it, and their execution is extremely poor. So that creates situations. Those three situations creates all sorts of opportunity for an adroit, smaller operator to exploit and to drive his business forward. And we see this time and again, and not just in the Guam marketplace, we see it in all the markets where we're active, in the CNMI, in Hawaii, and in American Samoa. So you just, you look for those three things, because they're always there. And you know, there is opportunity between the elephant's toes. Just go take advantage of it.
Thanks, Bob. That's really, really great advice. Excellent. Yes, certainly.
Yeah, same topic. I was saying that we are big. In fact, we are only big in bandwidth or capacity, but we are small in capability and small in collaboration. So what we did, I think, in my company, we are only big in bandwidth. We actually leverage on the big telcos, even leverage on the branding, leverage on their customer service and technical expertise. The only thing we can contribute is bandwidth. So I guess Andrew was saying is correct. We don't do everything ourselves. We just look at the area we can do properly. The rest we just outsource, leverage, so long as we can be self-sustaining and profitable, hopefully.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any more inputs? Any more inputs on future revenues for small telcos? Got some great advice so far, but you guys surely got something inside those brains. I know it's getting close to 5 o'clock too, and it won't be long. Yeah, Maloney?
Thank you. Maui Sanford, consultant from Tahiti. Yeah, I think there are some, we talk about niche markets, or what does it mean? One area we found that could be a revenue stream, even though, you know, I'm working for a satellite integrator company and we have competitors, but I mean, let's be fair, we share. Telemetry, for example, telemetry. That can be something very interesting. Even the power company in the remote islands can remotely check the status of their network using very small elements, I mean, to get that research institutes.
Yep.
So there may be some other, this is just an example of a very small thing, and it adds up. It doesn't add too much cost so far. We'll have to check that on a few situations, but that could help really the operator to get new revenue streams.
Yeah. So go for a niche. Go for a niche. Look, get innovative. Go for a niche.
So I really think there are some different situations in every country, but some kind of really brainstorming exercise to find out maybe after a few beers, sometimes it works, maybe wine better, to get some ideas around it and take benefit of the existing infrastructure, existing means. If you have to, always we think about new services, new applications, invest. There are some things that you can do, even small, but it incrementally brings margins.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Anybody got any more comments on those sorts of things for the smaller, for the future? What's going to make us more successful in the future? Nothing. All right. You're all very, very successful. But
I think there's one
bring on NBN, you reckon? Yeah. Go on.
From our perspective, that, as I said, the industry changes a lot, but one thing that doesn't change, I think, is, I thought it was touched on earlier, is you've got to look after your customers, and the relationships with them is important, and make sure they're happy. You've got to make sure your customers are getting value from your service and they're benefiting from the service they buy off you. And that won't change, I don't think, for a very long time. So that's the number one. The rest comes after that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, look, I personally thank everybody so far, but I think when we go back to looking at a few of these things, there's a few things that we actually, smaller carriers, will have in common, I think, with some of the larger carriers in the world. Got any ideas what they could be? I mean, if we look at, we've looked at the challenges facing the smaller carriers, we've looked at some of the future where we're going to get the revenues from. Are the challenges that they face as small carriers the same as what they face as the larger organisations? Are the larger organisations intimidating in such a way that it frustrates the small players? Is that a real statement, or is that just, have we got anybody experience that type of thing? Having frustrations thrust upon them?
Just be remember, it's not paranoia when they really are out to get you. I can't believe I'm the only one that's had to fight off an incumbent.
Well, you gave us the story about how many hours to do the interconnect agreement? I mean,
A year, page by page, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, in our experience, and I can also speak to the larger U.S. experience in deregulation, and you know, almost going back to Judge Green's consent decree and the original bust-up of AT&T. In the American experience with telco liberalization, intimidation has become extremely embedded in the playbook of all incumbents. Right? I forget his name, but the fellow when they busted up AT&T, he wound up at the top of one of the region of the RBOX, and he made a conscious decision. The state regulatory regimes where this RBOC operated put in place service interval penalties, and it's almost like an opt-out situation. It's very common. You'll find this across the United States. And you know, if there's a service interval delay complaint, it's an automatic penalty to the provisioning ILEC. All right? It's like they just get the bill and they have to pay it. All right? So this guy said, we are not going to acknowledge our service interval obligations under regulations. We're just going to eat these penalties. And he ate them, and he ate them, and he ate them, and at the end of the day, he ate over $1 billion in penalties, just so he could continue to thwart the growth of his competitors in his region. Very successful. So intimidation in the American experience is tightly interwoven into the ILEX playbook, so tightly that tactic reached all the way across the Pacific and across the date line to Guam and to the CNMI. So I can't, the name doesn't come to mind, but yeah, it's $1 billion. Now that sounds like a lot of money, but remember this, a billion over several years to an RBOC to sustain its position and its dominance in its region. You know, it's not in that context, it's not a huge investment, okay? And it was a very, very successful, in his region, it was a very successful tactic.
Right? There's other frustrations that come through on the international side as well.
Yeah.
I mean, look at your interconnect fees sometimes I know this is all much more regulated now, or much more controlled, and maybe even considered more reasonable. But you go to cable stations, you go to a data center, you're paying cross-connect fees, you're paying interconnect fees. So there are all these different ways that a smaller player who may not have the money to own these things can be penalised or intimidated by a larger carrier. But there are certain things that we all face, and I suppose be you a small carrier or a larger carrier, and we all got to comply with our licence. And I, generally speaking, would imagine that the licence that Andrew has for his business is not dissimilar to the licence that Optus has for their business.
It's exactly the same carrier licence.
Yeah. And that would be the same case in the United States, and I assume most countries that have licences, and I'm not sure about Palau, does it have licences?
Just for the RF management side.
Yeah,
radio license.
just for the radio licenses. Yes. So there's certain rules and changes that will vary from country to country, but there are ways of being intimidated. There are things that we share in common with the larger carriers. But I think, first of all, thanks for all of your input. Nearly everybody's said something, not really. But I think that there's certain things that the larger carriers could learn from the smaller carriers. And I wouldn't mind if we could just go to that slide, I'd love to try and populate that just a little bit of a few of the key things that we think that a larger carrier can learn from a smaller carrier. Brainstorm any ideas? Anything come straight to mind? I think that's probably the top of the list, okay? Customer service. Anybody got any other ideas? Could you repeat that for us? Here comes the microphone.
No, I said in theory, if it's small to mid-sized business price, so not only do they give good customer service, they're able to...
A reasonable price.
Yeah. So in theory, if the big players in the small markets, they, in theory, like Andrew said, maybe don't care about as much. If they're retailing a Hugo Boss suit for $1,000 and he's buying it for $600,
Yep.
they're able to come in at $800 and offer good customer service. But what's happening in recent times is they're really only buying the suit for $900 now, and there's $100 to play with, unfortunately.
Yeah, gotcha. All right. We went through a few of the strengths of them. I suppose you could nearly say some of the things that make smaller carriers successful, like the flexibility, the adaptability. Are they the things that a larger carrier can learn? Do you think larger carriers want to learn?
We have to assume they can, because if we're arrogant and ignorant, we'll get eaten up. So we've got to assume they will adapt as well, but probably not as fast.
All right. Anybody got any other items that they wanted to add in regards to what can we learn? It's customer service. I think customer service was what I was told previously. Sure. Yeah.
Let these other guys take the small one.
Okay, so they can learn how to actually target their markets.
There's certain customers, as a small telco, you won't get. You can throw a proposal over the fence, but I wouldn't spend too much time on your sales effort on it. Focus on where the fruit's easier
That's
to
great.
get off the tree.
Thanks for that. That was excellent. Anybody got any other ideas? How can you be more... What can these larger guys learn from us? Because they're the ones that are going to read the slides.
We should send them false information.
I will. So, you want false information
Yes,
on this? No, it's probably not a good idea, Andrew. No. Any more inputs?
My experience is the decision-making process also in large telcos can be quite lengthy, political, whereas the small telcos have less stakeholders, as they call them, in a decision, so decisions get made faster. So, if you're a large telco, obviously streamlining decision-making processes, obviously everything needs business cases, but generally I think the large telcos string that business analysis out way too far before they make a decision.
You got anything? Would you add to that?
Yeah, well, I just think go back to more to company culture and personality traits.
I like that.
And yeah, I ran into an old friend of mine I hadn't seen in years at the reception last night. And he had retired from a large telco after 47 years with the company. And and he was reflecting on his retirement. He said, Bob, I had 3 objectives, career objectives. And he said, I wanted to do as little as possible, and I wanted to do it for as long as possible, and I wanted to get as much money as possible for doing that. And he thought about it, and he goes, well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So, to me, it's extremely telling. And it was only half tongue-in-cheek. The story was related only half tongue-in-cheek. He was being very honest about the culture that you find in not just large telcos, but it's probably endemic in large telcos, but in any large organization. Whether you call it the Dilbert cubicle mentality or however you want to characterize it. Small operators thrive on the ability of their customers to embrace their vision. But more importantly, or just as importantly, they thrive on their employees' willingness to embrace their vision. If you don't have that in your culture, if everybody's not on board with the mission, you got people who literally will sit there for 47 years doing as little as possible for as long as possible, for as much as possible. So, yeah, I think that's a takeaway for any large organization.
Hi. Heather from Macquarie. The question or comment is around people, because we've talked about customer service, but I'm curious as to whether we think as a group that smaller or mid-sized telcos get people better in terms of our own staff, in terms of engagement and retention, because I think that ultimately our businesses will be successful if we hire quality people, train them effectively, have a high level of engagement, an engaged culture, a culture that drives results, and we keep those people in the business as long as possible. I'm not really sure whether I think we have the capability, along with being adaptable and flexible, to bring a culture that does all those things better. But I know that some of the larger telcos have the resources to drive, expensive diversity programs and fund every, breakfast and lunch, et cetera, around the community. So I'm curious as to whether we think as a group that we, can play better in that space in terms of getting people right. And the other thing I'd say, tongue-in-cheek, is that we get a lot of our people from the incumbents who are, that get their training there and then bring them across. So maybe we're playing the same. Maybe we're fishing in the same pond for people.
Yeah. Thanks, Heather. Look, I'm very conscious of time at the present stage. What I think we can do is probably answer Heather's question with just a quick show of hands. Who thinks that one of the things that the smaller telcos have and bring with them is probably a work ethic and a culture that is perhaps worthwhile nurturing and maintaining as one of the strengths that they all have? I personally think, as a show of hands, that is pretty important stuff. The other thing that's probably pretty important to you all is the end of the day, and I just really need to thank everybody in the room for all of their contributions. I hope that when we get this slide pack cleaned up, we will probably issue it out as part of the proceedings for the meeting, and you'll be able to see some of the things to remind you of what happened today. So I'd just like you to all just give a quick round of applause for these guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'd like us to give them a quick round of applause as well. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Enjoy the rest of PTC. Aloha.